thing on? Hello? Alright, that's 8 seconds of... Alright, Brooklyn Mabai, welcome everyone. I wanted to make a video, even though I wrote something responding. Sometimes it's easier to talk, especially in commute. I'm on my way to my Sunday job, which is different than my rest of the week job. I saw something on Torah.com asking, why don't Orthodox Jews work? And the answer was, we do. I'm going to work right now. So I don't know how Orthodox I am, but I try my best. So here we are. There's an excellent question posed from Rabbi Dr. Noam Weinberg at Noam Nechama on Twitter.com. Rabbi Dr. Weinberg and I are both students of the same Rebbe I had in high school, Rav Moshe Weinberger as a Rebbe in Ezra Academy back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I believe Rabbi Dr. Weinberg davened in his shul until he moved to the Holy Land. And he has here, I'm very happy that it's presented in a serious question. Please shed some light on this for me. How do legit Jewish anti-Zionists, I'm not referring to Neturei Karta, reconcile the inherent discrepancy between hishtadlus, which means putting in effort in this world and not only relying on God to provide everything for you, and general bechira, meaning free will, and the fact that Hashem, meaning God, sent us into Galus, sent us into exile, and thus we cannot come back to reclaim Israel as our own Jewish country until Mashiach comes. Meaning, if we say that hishtadlus is an essential idea in Judaism, why does it stop with trying to reverse Hashem's decision for us to be in exile? My initial response here is there are many statements in Chazal that make it clear that hishtadlus, meaning effort, is forbidden when it comes to actualizing eschatology. That's not a Jewish word, but meaning bringing about the end times. Eschatology means study of the end times. The main reason for this is that it is counterproductive and increases hatred against Jews, which is what I see. You know, I'm walking down the street in my little town, and I'm assuming it's some folks from the city who come up on vacation. It was Memorial Day weekend, and there were some guys in the bar, and one guy, kind of halfway joking, said "Free Palestine" to me with my Strimal on. Not a Zionist. Why am I getting blamed for what is perceived that Israel is doing, although I don't think Israel is doing anything that bad? I think in this case, which I'm not always happy, we can apply, what's the guy's name? He was on our podcast, Alan Dershowitz's rule that if you apply different rules to Israel than you would to other countries, that's anti-Semitism. And if any other country went through what Israel went through in October 7th, they would have done a lot more against their enemies. And no one would have blamed them. They're just being held to a different standard because it's Israel. That's pretty obvious. And so again, this whole existence of the state of Israel has been, I feel, a net negative for the Jewish communities around the world. Like Rabbi Victor Miller used to point out, as soon as the state of Israel was founded, Jews were chased out of all of the Muslim majority countries where they had been loyal citizens for millennia, some of them, and certainly for centuries. Even the truth is that Rav Soloveitchik from Yeshiva University, Zatzal, also understood this to be true. That, historically, Jews had more problems living in Christian countries and less problems in Muslim countries. Not that either was absolute. There were some good times among Christians and some bad times around Muslims. But for the most part, Jews living in Muslim countries lived better than Jews living in Christian countries for most of the history of Islam, being shorter than the history of Christianity. And what changed was Zionism. And it's not only the State of Israel in 1948, but really the Zionist movement starting in the 1890s that really changed things. I stick by this idea. Netanyahu, which I don't wish any personal ill will against him, he always points out that the Holocaust happened because the Mufti of Jerusalem gave Hitler the idea of what Hitler called the final solution, meaning that Hitler originally just wanted to expel all the Jews and probably send a bunch of them to the Holy Land, and the Mufti of Jerusalem said no. Now, why did the Mufti say no? Now, what Netanyahu always leaves out is, why did the Mufti say no? If the Jews would come as refugees, as and accept dhimmitud, as Jews had in Muslim lands for centuries, according to Islam, the Mufti would not be allowed to say no. But it was because of the Zionist movement, where instead of coming as humble refugees and accepting the second-class status as dhimmis, they wanted to come as conquerors. And within the realm of Dar al-Islam, in Islamic view, that would be a problem. Now, to me, the Islamic view on that particular thing is inconsequential, because what really is more important to me as a Jew is, what does the Torah say? What do our sages teach? And the fact of the matter is that as we're addressing here, and if you would look in the book of Jeremiah, for example, or the book of Isaiah, we see the warnings against listening to the false prophets who say, let's go back to Jerusalem during the decree of exile. Especially in Jeremiah. Jeremiah calls Nebuchadnezzar, in the name of God, my servant, meaning by Jeremiah, God calls Nebuchadnezzar my servant, because he is doing God's will of punishing the Jews for their sin of idolatry. And so too, in the book of Isaiah, it says, Asher Shevet Api, that Assyria is the rod of my anger, meaning that God has plenty of rods in his toolbox. And so if it's not Assyria, it'll be Babylonia. If it's not Babylonia, it'll be Persia. If it's not Persia, it'll be Greece. If it's not Greece, it'll be Rome. If it's not Rome, it'll be the Arab world. And so too today. So if it's not the Palestinians, it could be the Chinese. It could be any number of tools that God would use to bring us back to him, to wake us up. This isn't retributive. This isn't hateful. This isn't even punitive. It's corrective. It's God waking us up to try to go back to the right path. And it's not only in the sense of being more religious, but really living in the right way. Of course, being religious is part of that, but it's not the end-all and be-all of what that's about. And so while the State of Israel has a lot of positive aspects to it, I think still, if the State of Israel would consider itself a non-sectarian state as opposed to a Jewish state, which is something else that I addressed here, because one of the comments below said, well, the reason, so this guy here says, I'm not sure what you're asking. There aren't many legitimate Jewish anti-Zionists. Satmar is Zionist, but only if it's religious, which it's not. The true anti-Zionists are nearly assimilated and won't have Jewish grandchildren. I don't know, and don't know what Hishtadlus means. This is GB in Israel. That's just patently false. Satmar is not Zionist, unless you consider wanting Mashiach to come to be Zionist, because what they're saying there is that only if it's religious. That's more of the Kahanist view. The Kahanist view is we have to make the State of Israel religious. Almost nobody else really is pushing for the State of Israel to be a religious state other than the Kahanists. The most of the religious Zionist world are happy with the status quo that they live among. Meaning, the average religious Zionist in Israel just, is doing their thing. That's just how that works. And the average religious non-Zionist I'm looking at all of this. The average religious non-Zionist also are just looking to maintain the status quo. When I say religious non-Zionists, I mean the average Agudist Haredim who believe that it should not be a religious state. That is the belief of the average Haredi. At least, maybe it's changed because the influence of the religious Zionists have creeped into particularly the more right-wing Kahanist views. And I have a respect for all these different views. I have a tremendous love for Meir Kahane. I just think he was wrong. My Zayden was a big supporter of Meir Kahane. And I think he was a voiler Erlich, just like Rav Victor Miller, Zechusi Aguleno, looked at Meir Kahane, Hashem Yimkum Damo. He had no hate for Meir Kahane, just they had different views. Obviously, Rav Victor Miller was a much bigger gadol, not just because he was Haredi, but Rav Meir Kahane was a Yid who knew how to learn. He was a shtickle Talmud Chacham. Some of the ideas that he came up, I see some intellectual dishonesty motivated by the emotions of Zionism. As I said in a recent video, talking about Nathan Slifkin, how he, calls himself a rationalist, and I don't see any rationalism in Zionism. Zionism to me is an emotional movement. And if I would follow my emotions, I'd be the biggest Zionist. But following seichel and common sense and rationalism is where I come in. It's the same thing I saw Rabbi Gil's student, Solka Zunstein, and he was saying, I'm not a chassid. I'm not just, I don't care because the Satmar Rebbe is just as a Rebbe. The Satmar Rebbe's views had nothing to do with Hasidus. First of all, the Satmar Rav wasn't really a big fan of Hasidus. The Hungarian approach to Hasidus, which is a whole different subject that I'd love to speak about, is more of a holistic view of Judaism where you didn't have the opposition to Hasidism as you did in other countries, but rather you found a holistic approach that included Hasidism, but that wasn't the major banner of who they are. Meaning in Chabad, the major banner of the Chabad identity is that they are Hasidim. In Satmar, it's more that they're Haredim than Hasidim, I guess would be the biggest idea, is that they are Haredish Yidden, not Hasidish Yidden as much. Meaning that they are ultra-Orthodox. And in a certain way, the way that Reb David Meisler from Seagate, he explained to me, he said, there's no such thing as a Satmar Chumrah. Satmar Rav understood what he did to be the Ikar Adin. And other people disagree and understand others. And the truth is, really, one of my Rebbeim, Rabbi Yaakov Siegel, says that really, when it comes to Ashkenazim, the ones who get closest to the Ikar Adin are the Hungarians. Because they're less influenced politically in halacha than other Ashkenazi groups are. And they recognize what's politics and what's halacha. Whereas the classical Sephardim, which today many of the Sephardim, Rabbi Siegel would say, have been influenced more by the Litvish Ashkenazim, but that the classical Sephardim are the ones who follow the Ikar Adin. So that's why he's a big fan, even though he's a Breslover Chosid, but he's a big fan of Rav Abadi as far as halacha. Rav Abadi should have a Pushleim, and so should Rabbi Siegel. In any event, I want to get back to this main question here. So there are several statements in Chazal that, again, just from a biblical standpoint, first from the Torah standpoint, let's go in order. So from a plain Torah standpoint, what is this idea of Hishtadlus versus Gadlus? Why can't we make Hishtadlus against Gadlus? Why can't we make an effort to end the exile? Why in the anti-Zion? And again, I'm saying this with love and respect and recognizing that there are many different views, but Rabbi Dr. Weinberg asked a very good question, and I'm trying to explain it in the best way that I can. And you know, I say part of it is Rabbi Weinberger doesn't talk about these things because he lives in Woodmere. He can't talk about them, you know, because he'd get in trouble. People would get upset at him if he talks about these things. But in Ezra Academy, he spoke a little bit more openly about these things. And he also taught us to respect both sides. He had respect for the Satmar view. He had respect for the Kahana's view. He had respect for Rav Kook's view. He had respect for Rav Soloveitchik's view. He had respect for all these different views. And he doesn't really fall into any of them particularly. You know, that was always Rabbi Weinberger's biggest message. If anybody really wants to, I remember once on Yutes Kislev, he said that, you know, Yutes Kislev was when we celebrate that the Alter Rebbe got out of prison. And he said, but the Alter Rebbe is still in prison, and all the tzaddikim are still in prison, because people think that the Baal Tanya belongs only to Chabad, or even the last Lubavitch Rebbe only belongs to Lubavitch, and the Satmar Rebbe belongs only to the Satmar, and Rav Ovadia Yosef belongs only to the Sfardim, and Rav Soloveitchik belongs only to the modern Orthodox, and Rav Kook belongs only to the religious Zionists. And he said all the tzaddikim belong to everyone. That's one of the things I remember, you know, because my wife, Zalkazun Sein, you know, she came into Yiddishkeit largely through Satmar. My wife's a Gioris, and my family in Naheim were from Satmar. You know, so it was my kids learned in Satmar, and I remember when we were Chosin Kal, I took my wife to Rav Weinberger for a bracha, and he said something from Rav Kook, and I said, you know, my wife is more along the lines of the Satmar world, and he said the tzaddikim are only fighting in this world, but in Olam Haba, Satmar Rav and Rav Kook are sitting and learning together. My wife was offended by that. I was a little bit. It was a little bit interesting idea, but then what I saw by another Rebbe of mine who I picked up along, you know, or Hashgacha Pratis, led me to is Rabbi Siegel's Al-Kazun Sein. He tells this story about when he was a Rav in Eretz Yisrael, and then he came back to America, and he had a shaila on Amara, and he always said, if you can't find a Sephardi dayan, you go to Hungarian dayan, because the Hungarians know the Ikar Adin, and like the Sephardim do, and then everybody else is just politics. That's the way Rabbi Siegel teaches. Tzolkazun Sein. He needs a big refuah, Rav Yaakov Levi ben Chanash, a refuah shlema, and he tells the story that he went to a certain Hungarian dayan, Nitra or Satmar or wherever he went, with a Shaila Namara, and then he said, well, who are you? You know, because he doesn't go with the Levush, and he asked. So the dayan asked Rabbi Siegel, who are you to be poskening on Maras? And he said, I have shimush from this one, from that one. I think again from Bells and from Nitra and different. And so he said, okay. So then he said, he mentioned Rav Ovadia, who he was a Talmud Mufak by Rav Ovadia, said like this one. He's like, oh my goodness, I just mentioned someone who was the chief rabbi of Israel to a Satmar Chassid. So this dayan, he said, yeah, I had that in mind also. He didn't get upset. He didn't get offended. He recognize Rav Ovadia Gadol Ador. Whereas in the literature world, you don't see it like that. With all due respect to the literature world, but there's not as much respect for Rav Ovadia, even though they would, Rav Shach and Rav Ovadia would sit together. But I'm saying in Torah, there wasn't that type of respect, as opposed to by the Hungarians, even though politically they would have disagreed very strongly in certain things, even though Rav Ovadia really wasn't as much of a Zionist as people would think. Just he had a position as the chief rabbi of Israel, and he would always point out that the position of the Rishon LeZion existed even before Herzl. So it's not a Zionist position as much as the Ashkenazi chief rabbi is more of a Zionist position. The Sephardi chief rabbi is more of a old traditional position that's just being preserved. But anyway, let's get back to this question. I've gone on for 20 minutes talking about this. So, in the Torah, and again, with all due respect, that most of the religious Zionist world, coming up in a few weeks to Parsha Shlach, right? About 3 weeks from now, they look at the story of the Meraglim to be the biggest proof for Zionism. Because look, here, the biggest Rebbes, the biggest Gedolim, they were all wrong about Eretz Yisrael. That's the type of thing I used to hear Victor Van Seer used to say on TV, look, these are the big Rebbes, these are the big Gedolim, and they were wrong, and that shows that the Gedolim are wrong today. That's what Victor Van Seer used to say on TV in Queens. I don't know if he's still on TV I know he's probably online still, but I met him once, I remember, and back in the day, Chaim ben Pesach, right? But anyway, we used to watch him every week. That was back in the day on the public access channels in Queens. Twice a week he had the show every week, and then Mordechai Friedman, who I used to see all the time in Queens, his show wasn't as good, right? That was a tight mashiga, but this. We'll look at that later. I want to stick to this. So anyway, but what about the end of the story of the Meraglim? We have the Mapilim, right? After the story of the spies, and God made a decree of 40 years, however we got there, but once we got that decree, there was a group of people who were the religious Zionists of their day. They said, we're going to go up and we're going to conquer it, and Moshe Rabbeinu said, V'hiloi sitzlach. Moses said it will not succeed, and it didn't succeed, and they got killed. And there were actually some tzaddikim who said that the Zionists were the Gilgal of the Mapilim. I think it was the Sedrerov or Sedrerov. It was one of the Hungarian Rabbanim who said such an Indian that they would have a little bit of Hatzlacha, and it would be an asoyan for the Klal Yisrael. That they'd have a little bit of success, and it would be a test and a temptation. That this group, the Mapilim, the people who dared to go up after the decree was sealed, that they would have this. And so again, we have in Isaiah, like I said before, in Yeshayahu, Asher Shevet Api, as serious the rod of my indignation, and then in Jeremiah, several chapters that talk about, the late 20s and early 30s in Jeremiah, that talk about this, probably, I'm thinking chapters 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, thereabout, that talk about this whole concept in Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, that talk about this concept of the exile and not making hishtadlus about the exile, but rather accepting the yoke of exile, the ol hagolus, and not fighting against it. And that's really the message that we have here. And so then, of course, we get to the Chazal. Everybody knows the 3 oaths. One of the people here was claiming that the 3rd oath was broken, and so now we can do what we want. That's not how certainly not how the Maharal learned it. My holy Zayd, the Maharal Prague, certainly did not learn it like that. In fact, just the opposite. But that the oaths teach us that we will have more hatred against Jews if we break these oaths. So it's almost that, but they're really not considered to. And when he says the third oath was broken, meaning it's a passage in the Song of Songs. It says, "I'm making you swear, daughters of Jerusalem, not to arouse or awaken my love until I desire." And at certain points it says, "I'm making you swear by the deer and the antelope of the field." And so the Gemara, the Talmud in Ksubos, in the tractate on marriage contracts at the end, where it talks about devotions to the Holy Land, still nonetheless explains that we're not allowed to try to actualize eschatology. We're not supposed to push the end times, go up as a wall, different interpretations of what that means, push the end times even through too much prayer, etc., etc. But rather we're supposed to patiently wait for the Messiah to come. And there's a Medrash in Esther that talks about this as well, and there's a Zohar on the pasuk in Amos, in the book of Amos, that it says Basulas Yisrael Lo Yisakum, right, that the Virgin of Israel will not arise, that the Zohar says will not arise on her own, but rather will have to wait for the Messiah to come. So these are ideas that go back to ancient times, and it makes sense just from the rationalist view, from the logical view. You know, when we look at countries like Iran, for whom in Shia Islam, eschatology is a major part of Shia Islam, right? The Mahdi and all of this is a major, major aspect of Shia. And what the Iranians want to do is actualize their eschatology through wars. You know, that's why they want to, and for some reason, you know who is helping them after President Trump put a stop to it, but we're not going to talk about politics because on YouTube we get in trouble for doing that. The same guy who, after President Trump took money away from Hamas, the guy gave their money back, and anyone who supports him has blood on their hands of all those martyrs, the Jews who got murdered on October 6th. That's Biden's fault. I'll say the name. And anybody who helped him get where he is. But that's neither here nor there. There's also another Gemara that says, Ben David Bad Shetichl Malchus Azulus B'Yisrael, that the son of David will not come until the most petty kingdom ceases among Israel. Some assume that to mean the opposite. There's different approaches, although the truth of the matter is Israel now is not an independent country. You know, Benjamin Kahane used to say, what are we celebrating Yom Ha'atzmaut for? We're dependent on American foreign aid, and that comes with strings attached. So the libertarian view of stopping foreign aid, you know, would lead to an independence. The end of the Civil War was near when All right, I'm sorry I had a phone call and now I have to go to work, but a half hour is long enough for a video. So that's essentially the idea, though, is that, you know, I'll tell you a mashal. You know, what if you have a parent who sends a kid to their room to punish them, and then they decide, you know, oh, I learned my lesson, I can leave now. You know, that's not how this works. You know, if someone escapes from jail, right, they get more jail time. And not only that, but it says Oz. We read last week in Parshas B'chukosai, Oz tirtzu shabsei seho, that the idea of Golus is that the land should have rest. And we read in the Pirkei Avos, that same Shabbos, that Bolas Kol Olam, because of the three Gimel Chamuras, Shvichas Damim, Gilui Rayos, Avodah Zarah, and Shemitah, Shmotas Haaretz, that the land needs a rest. So that even without Zionism, that just Stamazoi being in Eretz Yisrael, so at least the 70 years in Bavel, there were no Yidden in Eretz Yisrael, so they kept so it was Shemitah. But there hasn't been any time without an Yidden in Eretz Yisrael. And so Shemitah, if we're not keeping Shemitah, Sahar Bazach, it's making Golus much longer. So we have to take these things very seriously. That's a different part of it. And there's another whole aspect which we could discuss also, the question of, the Medrash says that when Mashiach comes, Yerushalayim will be as big as Eretz Yisrael is now, and Eretz Yisrael will be as big as the whole world. Now, does that mean the rest of the world will get bigger, or just the whole world will become Eretz Yisrael? Are we actually going to go to another geographic location when Mashiach comes, or are we going to make this world better? Or we're just going to cloister ourselves into a little piece of land as big as New Jersey, just and think about ourselves? Or are we here to make the whole world a better place? And that's really the mission, to be a light to the nations. That's a separate issue also. So not only that, so one other thing Satmarov would always point out is there's a Chesed Lavrom, that was the Chidah Zayda. And he said that when Mashiach comes, there'll only be a few thousand Jews in Eretz Yisrael. And the Satmarov said he would shake people if he would learn that Chesed Lavrom and cry and hope that the Jews are going to leave Eretz Yisrael in a peaceful way, because if it's only going to be a few thousand Jews in Eretz Yisrael when Mashiach comes, it's a very scary thought, because now there are millions. So what's going to happen to them? So and so this state as it exists, again, I guess there are other Sfarim that look at things in a different way, but these are the Sfarim that the religious anti-Zionists are looking at and pointing to say that this is why we don't believe in Hishtadlus with these things. And again, it's rationally, like I was saying, you see the irrational nature and the danger that a country like Iran poses. I don't mean the people, I mean the regime, being extreme Shiite. And that same type of extremism, although Lamaisa, we don't, even the most extreme Kahanists don't have anything like the extremism of the Shiites in Iran. But nonetheless, Meir Kahane didn't want any Arabs to get killed. He always said, I don't hate Arabs, I love Jews, I wish the Arabs well, just elsewhere. That was Meir Kahane's view. He didn't want any Arab to ever die. He didn't believe in genocide. And not only that, he said they could stay there if they have what is the equivalent of a dhimmi to the Jews, meaning to be a ger toshav. If they accept the ger toshav status, they could stay and practice their religion. He wasn't so extreme to say they had to give up Islam or Christianity or anything else. They just they couldn't have full citizenship rights. That was Meir Kahane's view, if they insisted on living in that particular land. They have so many other places to go. They want to live there, or they could convert to Judaism and then have full citizenship rights. That was the way that Kahane viewed it, which would be like applying Hilchos Malachim. But the Haredi world, the ultra-Orthodox world, rejects that, because we don't believe in that type of approach. We reject that approach because Mashiach is not here yet. When Mashiach comes, we won't need to tell anybody to follow these halachos. Probably a lot of people will want to convert before everything is settled or whatever it is. But if they want to be B'nai Noach and they want to live like that, it's not going to be really it's not going to be the same way that dhimmis lived under Islam. And being a ger toshav never was like a dhimmi under Islam, but it's the most similar zushtel that you could make. Obviously, being a dhimmi under Islam was not a happy, fun thing, but still, nonetheless, I'd rather be a living dhimmi than a dead soldier in Israel. You want to have a devotion to the Holy Land and show that devotion by residing there. You have to go with, so it's going to be one or the other. Either there's the wars, or a dimitude. I would pick dimitude rather than. I don't think that, what was it? There was they said no. Nobody ever won a war by dying for their country. I saw someone said from Patton, I think it was. The idea is to win and not to die. And the thing is, over 24,000 Jews would still be alive if Zionism didn't exist since 1948. And the truth is, probably the 6 million, if it wasn't for Zionism, the 6 million, many of them could have gone to Israel, other places. A lot of history behind that. What Rav Weissmandel was involved with he found out that you could bribe the Nazis. He said for $2 million they could have saved 1 million Jews. The secularists and the Zionists and others didn't want to do it because they wanted the Rachmanis after the war, and also they wanted to get rid of. The truth is, a lot of the secular Jews want to get rid of the religious Jews. That's what Chaim Weitzman. We have. These aren't your friends. There's a lot to it, but that's the history behind it. But also Hishtadlus, and you want to get to the Hasidic point of view. Hishtadlus isn't viewed as important. Certainly, I know, Dr. Weinberg, you've learned Ishbitz. You know what I'm talking about. Bechira and Hishtadlus and Ishbitz. I can't imagine learning Ishbitz or Sfarim. Although, of course, Satmar rejected Ishbitz and Sans and so forth. But if you go to Kiryas Yol, to Sfarim store, you'll find Ishbitz or Sfarim too. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment. We'll see you later.